Well, welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This is episode titled Extraordinary Women Living Extraordinary Lives. This is episode 52. My name is Melissa Durrell and I'm your host. Women's March Canada inspires, unites, and leads the charge for the advancement of women across Canada. So please welcome today's guest, Shannon Skinner. Shannon, nice to have you on our show.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. I'm grateful, and you're doing some really good stuff, so that's great.
Thank you.
All in sisterhood.
Right? Coming from a broadcaster herself. So Shannon's an award-winning broadcaster, speaker, author, travel journalist, and the brains behind Extraordinary Women TV and the Shannon Skinner live radio show. In her free time, Shannon loves to travel, obviously, right? Hang with her amazing pooch, Bob, and take French and improv lessons. Can't wait to hear more about that. So let's start, first of all, with tell me a little bit about your show. Now, I say extraordinary. Do you say extraordinary or do you say extraordinary?
Extraordinary.
Yeah. Okay, good. So tell me about this show. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, the concept came to me, actually, it was quite a personal story, actually. I had been thinking about doing a radio show at the time. Well, this is television, but at the time, I was thinking about doing a radio show, and I had some reservations about it at that time. And then I found out a good friend of mine was quite ill, and he told me one evening that he just found out that he had less than a year to live.
Oh, gosh.
And I, at that time, was filled with doubt and fear about what I wanted to do with this radio show. Mm-hmm. And I went home that night, and I was very sad for my friend. And at the same time, I asked myself, well, if I had a year to live, if somebody told me I had a year or less than a year to live, what would I do with my time? And that question led me down the road of eventually starting Extraordinary Women TV. At the time, it was early stages in live streaming, so it was really the first of its kind. And it was something I just really wanted to tell women's stories. I knew in my heart that I had the skills and knowledge coming from a professional communication PR background, that I had the skills and know-how to do it. And so that question, that quality question, if I had less than a year to live, what would I do, was what really prompted me to get it done.
It's such a gut reaction, right, when you think about it. And I think so many of us, you do the typical spend more time with family, but frankly, that doesn't pay the bills. And so you do need to think of something. Is this more of a give back for you, or is it also a revenue source?
Well, it was started as live stream. It's been a television show. At the moment, it's digital. We are right now expanding, creating some new things for it. So I'm excited to be able to share with you at some point soon what that is. Cool. But for me, for now, I've just been thrilled just to be able to tell women's stories. I think I have logged something like over 300 video interviews with women over the years. And so my focus just in the last year, I've been doing a lot of travel writing as a little bit of a switch for me. Not so much a switch, but that's been a little bit more of a focus this past year. But then now, as I'm sort of developing new and growing, and I'm very excited about what is to come. So yes, I was just on a really interesting trip, though, I would like to share.
Yeah, tell me all about it.
Because the nature of your podcast.
Yeah.
So I was just in Wyoming.
Okay.
Down there on a trip. Now, Wyoming is, at a glance, it may not sound like the most exciting place in the world. It's stunning, by the way, beautiful. But Wyoming is known as the Equality State. And it's the Equality State because it is the first territory in the world where women were granted the right to vote. First territory. The first woman in the world voted in Wyoming, the first governor, and also.
What year was that? Do you know what year that was that she voted?
about 150 years ago. So next year, they celebrate 150 years. It's the 150th anniversary in Wyoming. And there's a lot of celebrations actually planned. And it was kind of a cool spot to go and to travel there's a cowgirls museum there and to study and learn about the pioneer
That's
women.
what I think about Wyoming, not to be stereotypical, but
yeah.
Me.
But you know, it was really interesting to be there as a Canadian. Mm-hmm. in the United States. That's their history, but it is also our history as well. Now, if we remove this idea that there's a border, we're different countries, yes, but at the same time, sort of this in sisterhood or in celebration of women and uplifting women, we share the same struggles, the same cause. So it was really fascinating. And I went hiking with, there's a woman who has a company that takes only women out hiking to get them out into the outdoors, and I met, you know, women entrepreneurs on a road trip, and it was really, really fascinating. But I raise it because it's if you're looking for a girls' road trip, Wyoming might be something to actually consider, just because of the history, and this upcoming year is pretty special. So. And the thing that I got from it too was making conscious decisions about, for me now, traveling where we can help women that are local or make an impact in the community where women are. So support women-owned restaurants when you travel, or support hotels that are owned by women, businesses that are owned by women. And to make a conscious decision of that through our travels. And I think that will help also propel women, support them.
I'm just sort of looking up here. I know Wyoming does tend to go to the Republican side, and so I'm just wondering what it did in the last election. So I was just looking that up.
Yes, it is. It's traditionally a conservative state.
Yeah.
I had dinner with two female senators there. It was an interesting dinner we had.
Republican senators.
We talked politics.
War.
And I had a tour of the Capitol building where where women were granted the right to vote. It's all under construction now. It's being renovated, the whole building, but it was really interesting. So I wanted to just share that with you.
Well, I'd love to hear more about this dinner you had with these Republican senators. I mean, coming from Canada, and we have very different perspective on, I think, women's rights. And so I'm interested, especially after everything that went down with Kavanaugh in America. It definitely was very partisan and continues to be very partisan. So do you mind sharing some of that conversation?
Well, it was a group of travel writers and some other officials that were local, plus two of them.
So these senators are kind of selling you on how great Wyoming is. So you couldn't get into politics? Is that kind of?
We did. We did talk politics, and it was really interesting. I thought. I mean, they are Republicans, but they're really, really, these two women are really focused on helping women there. And, we sort of put from a political policy side, put that aside, but it was just really interesting to hear from them, two Republican women, about their lives there in Wyoming and what they're doing to help women. So that's what I found. I just found that really interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Do you find, it was interesting after that you started to talk about how you sort of seek out sort of those women-led restaurants or businesses and that kind of thing. I know that Toronto did this, and I thought it was really interesting. They actually had female entrepreneurs put forward their locations, and so you can they've geo-mapped in Toronto, so you can go to female led spaces. Do you think that's something that Canada might lean toward, like the whole country?
You just cut out there. Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There was an organization in Toronto that had female entrepreneurs put forward their companies, whether it's retail or consultancies, whatever it looked like. So you could go to Toronto and if you wanted to support female entrepreneurs, it was more accessible because, there's no hiding behind about pages or whatever. And I've always thought that would be kind of a neat idea for Canada. Do you think that's something that would be possible? Because otherwise you've got to investigate on your own, right? Isn't that what you've been doing?
Yes, that's correct, and that is what I've been doing as a travel writer. I just think that it's a conscious decision, and yes, there's always some great opportunities. I'm working on some things behind the scenes with what I'm doing, and I hope to be able to help women with those decisions. But I think it's just being conscious of when we're traveling and being aware. I mean, we're in who's not on the internet when you're traveling now and researching? I mean, we're always doing our own research. Yeah. So it's just a conscious decision, really, to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, do you find? I mean, obviously you're a feminist. What was it? Was there something in your life that really pushed you towards saying, I want to put women, put the microphone in front of them, get them talking about what they do? Was there any point in your life? Because I know broadcast, especially, a couple decades ago, was a pretty difficult space for women. So I'm wondering, how did that happen for you? Or was it just you've always felt like, we're not being heard 50% of the time, so I'm going to be the person to put the camera in their face?
Well, I just really, as a woman, what do I know best? What it is like to be a woman. And I really wanted to tell women's stories. And it actually, going back to the start of Extraordinary Women, at that time I'd also, before it started, I actually had written a manuscript profiling some women. And that was during the time when the economy turned down, mm-hmm. and publishers weren't taking on anything, and my literary agent, we couldn't get a publishing deal for it. Mm-hmm. And so when I had learned about live streaming, I thought, well, okay, I'd like to get these women's stories out anyway. Mm-hmm. And it just it was a natural progression. So I didn't stand out and say, these women are lost, or their stories need to be, are lost. It was more so, no, I've got these stories. I'm a woman. I really want to tell these women's stories, rather than a political or activist standpoint. However, that's become much more meaningful to me, or I'm much more driven now from an activist standpoint. Mm-hmm. So, I think women need to be heard. Mm-hmm. Our voices need to be heard. We need to be seen.
Agreed. What makes an extraordinary woman? You've interviewed over 300, you said, over the last little while. Have you been able to sort of pull some threads to weave together what makes up an extraordinary woman?
Well, to me, my definition is a woman who's really listening to her heart and taking action on it.
Nice.
And I think in that way, we can all be extraordinary.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, when we started this Women's March Canada podcast, I was driving my daughter home from dance with her little friend. I was carpooling that night, and I was asking them, who are some of the women you look up to? And they both gave me, my daughter, Hillary Clinton, but the other girl is Beyonce, right? So, awesome, but both American women. And it really occurred to me that we're not showcasing amazing women now. I think since that time, Krista Freeland to me is one of the most incredible women in Canada, and I just think she's doing awesome things. And there's some on both sides. Michelle Rempel. There's some great female politicians, but because Canada doesn't have that huge celebrity sort of feel to it. Where do we look like? Is it Arlene Dickinson? So, but then really there's a lot of amazing women out there that are doing amazing things, or extraordinary, if we want to use your language. So how do you find them, and where do they come from, and what are they doing? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the women that I have interviewed really come from all walks of life. They're coming from all fields and industries. Mm-hmm. I'm interested particularly in women who have transformed their lives in some way. Mm-hmm. Transformation is something that fascinates me. How someone can take a life of being a single mother uh, with basically no income and starting her own business on a kitchen table and ending up, creating a larger enterprise. I mean, these stories fascinate me, or someone who's been, had, cancer and was able to heal that naturally and go on and to help others. Or someone who has started an organization that helps women, transformation is something that just really fascinates me, rather than sort of women in one sort of industry. So for me, it was really, I've told all sorts of stories, but I mean, it's really women who can listen to their heart and can act on it.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking to these women, are they, I mean, a lot of them probably haven't been interviewed before. So
some haven't, that's right.
Yeah. And so how do you get them to be able to trust you to tell their story?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's when you're being present with them, when you're being fully present, when they don't feel that they're being judged. When we feel like we're being judged, we kind of clamp up. And having some compassion and just listening and understanding. I mean, I think it's maybe a combination of things, but a lot of women I've interviewed have been interviewed quite a bit. But yes, there are some that had not been.
One of my favorite stories, I was a journalist for a long time, and it was a story of a young girl who had cancer, and I'll never forget that story. And she didn't make it, and it was really difficult for me. Do you have, are there some stories that just stick with you that you'll never forget? And, actually you hear from people who, your viewers and fans, that there's certain stories that have just really struck them and stuck with them? Struck and stuck?
Struck and stuck. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a few. One is a young woman who lost her vision and the use of her hands in a industrial accident. It was at her job, and so she'd been blinded, and she can't use her hands. And so now for the rest of her life, she actually needs a team of people to help her. She's just recently had a baby, got married and had a baby. But she took that, instead of wallowing in, oh, woe was me and victimhood, turn that into inspiration to help others, to become a light. So she became a motivational speaker and a painter, and she paints beautiful work. Interior designers hire her, buy her paintings, and she cannot see, and she paints with a brush in her mouth and her knuckles and whatnot. And she really, really inspired me. I think in some ways changed me. Another woman is Dana Florence, who actually gave birth to triplets, and all three of her children are disabled. And again, there's a woman who took what is a pretty difficult situation, because none of them could walk or will be able to walk, and turn that into an organization to, again, help others, to help other kids that have neurological disorders and adults. And these are the stories that I find really fascinating.
Yeah, inspiring stories.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's fascinating. So is this how you came about your book? How did you, I mean, because you're meeting these incredible people who I think are also lighting the fire in your heart.
Yes.
And maybe even inspiring you. And so then you've written a book called The Whispering Heart, Your Inner Guide to Creativity.
So that I wrote that book prior. So that book is about creativity. Yeah. It is a how-to guide, how to unlock your heart, which is our inner power, and listen to the whisper of the wisdom, like the wisdom, like that. The wisdom of our heart speaks to us.
Mm.
And when we listen to it and follow it, and my message always is follow your heart, we cannot go wrong. So I wrote that book, some years ago, and before I had been doing what I do. I love telling stories. I love travel. And so these two things, when combined, that is sort of my sweet spot for me personally.
Well, and creativity has really, I mean, obviously being creative is awesome, but it seems to have surged again in the sense that with all of the technological advances that we're having, the one thing we can't teach robots, or we can't code creativity. So humans are becoming really relevant again because that's the way we're wired. And
Right.
So I've seen this sort of resurgence around creativity. And so it's interesting, when you talk to people about it, what are some of the things that how can you keep those creative juices flowing?
My problem is not how do I keep them flowing. It's like, how do I manage this, the steady, like stream waterfall of creative.
You're lucky. Yeah.
It is about inspiration. When we're inspired, we feel more creative. Creative juices will flow when we're inspired. When we're in a state of being uninspired, which could also, the extreme of being inspired is depressed. So when we're depressed or very uninspired, we're not very creative. But when we're inspired, that's when we're really creative. And inspiration is unique and personal to each individual. So what inspires you may not be what inspires me. What inspires me may not be what inspires you. We may have some things that we share in common, but not necessarily. So for me, when I'm feeling uninspired, because we always go out of a state of inspiration, it's not, if, it's when. It's kind of like the ebb and flow of life. So when I'm feeling uninspired, I go to a bookstore. And books just even looking at books in a bookstore may inspire me. Travel is what inspires me the most. I'm always thinking about travel. I'm talking about travel. I'm on the road traveling. Travel inspires me. It may be going to an art gallery or a museum, or just sitting in a park and watching kids, or going for a walk in the park, or playing with your dog. Inspiration can come from many different ways. But what's key, I think, though, particularly for our creativity, is to know what inspires you, and just to do more of it and keep doing as much as you can. Right. But know what inspires you, because when you fall out of inspiration, then you know what inspires you, and then you can go and do it and get inspired again. That's what's really key.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, you're very inspiring, and I'm trying to ask you this question. Like, if you could tell, where's the one place people should travel? What's your recommendation? Or is that too tough of a question?
No, India.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Where?
Well, I've seen quite a bit of India now, I would say. I love Rajasthan.
Okay. I'm writing this down, by the way.
I've seen quite a bit. I've seen the north, the northeast, the west. Now I've been to India 3 times in the last few years, and I'm now working on my 4th trip. I love India. It is, especially as a travel writer, it's just so rich with everything that you want. History, culture. It's a country that has its own issues. And as a woman traveling alone, which I have in India, it is, I understand that there's challenges and concerns. I've never had any problems. But I think it is just a country that is ancient and has so much to offer. You could just spend your life in India traveling around and still never really see all of it. So I would say India.
Very cool. It's on my list, but it's not the first one. I'll tell you that much.
No, what's your first one?
Well,
Really?
we have to get to South America. That is for me a place I haven't been. I've only sort of done the tip of it. So I would really like to do Brazil or, I have an 11-year-old daughter and she's obsessed with guinea pigs. And so there's wild cavies there. So I'd love to experience that with her and do some. So have you been there to South America? Can you recommend?
I've been to Argentina.
Mm.
And I've had a great experience in Argentina. I saw quite a bit of it, and I went aerobatic flying there,
Cool.
which is flying. I went to the vineyard area. It was really a lovely country. I mean, that was a few years ago. That was a personal trip. It wasn't a business trip. It was to see family.
Because you talk about Argentina, and the first thing that comes into my mind is at Women's March Global, we were working with some women in Argentina on getting the abortion vote, or just legalized pro-choice. And so do you politicize countries when you go there? Like you know who the prime minister is or the president, and does that happen to you, as a broadcaster as well, a news person?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. It's very interesting because I'm seeing my travels through a very different lens. If 2 years ago, this conversation would be different between us. 2 years ago, when Hillary Clinton lost the election in the United States, up to that point, I didn't really pay that much attention to American politics and as little as possible to Canadian politics. For me, it was more important to rise above the noise. And that's what I was striving to do constantly, is just rise above the noise. So I tried to stay out of politics. The 2016 American election changed me. I made a commitment to myself to study American politics. That's why actually having these conversations with the American senators was fascinating to me, because I made this commitment to study American politics, not formally, but informally. Sure. And I did. I've dived into it. I've read a lot. I wanted to know, why did a woman lose? And who clearly was completely capable at every level.
Yes.
Now we know a lot about what happened now, and it'll all come out in the wash, as they say. Yeah. But I made a commitment to study American politics, and somebody who had really almost zero interest in politics. Today, I know a lot more, certainly a lot more, and it was enough to actually have a conversation with 2 American senators. So I thought that was, that was like a marker for me. Yeah. But when I travel now, I see it through a political lens, and I'm finding I'm getting more and more political now. I read a book, Rick Steves wrote a book called Travel as a Political Act, which is quite interesting. And that's really important to him, politics and travel. But for me, I'm seeing that they go hand in hand. Like Brazil, had an election yesterday. And it's a scary election, particularly, I think, for women, because he feels that women should not be paid as much as men.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real movement in the world right now. And I have to say, like, as a Canadian, not to be on a soapbox here, but often I kind of think our travel dollars have to, are a way that we can show where we're supporting and where we're not, which, I mean, I have that luxury, but as a travel writer, I don't know if you always have that luxury, right? They tell you where to go and you got to go.
Yes, that's actually really is the case.
Yeah.
But I do see it now. I see travel very much through a political lens, and I'm finding that my interests are stronger, and I am really trying to understand the lives of women from both the political and cultural lens now where I travel. And I just think it's just going to get stronger, and there'll be more coming from me in that arena. And something's really interesting, and I think one of the reasons too I tried to stay out of politics up until recently is because I feel like I'm a spiritual being. I want to focus on my spirituality. Politics has no place. But really, politics and spirituality are very much linked. Marianne Williamson does it beautifully. You know, she'll say, love, you know, have faith, pray, and then fight like hell.
Yeah.
You know, which she does, right?
Yeah.
As an activist. And she's a perfect example of somebody who has blended those two things, and it is completely possible. So yes, that's how I see my travels now. And anyway, I've been inspired by people like Marianne Williamson and Rick Steves. So
very cool. Okay, so as you travel, I'm sure our viewers want to watch you. So can you tell us your Instagram, website, all your digits, and how we can find you?
Sure. Okay. So you can find my interviews, video interviews at extraordinarywomentv.com, my travel blog at shannonskinner.com. Social media, I've got a Facebook page now for my travels. That's official Shannon Skinner, I believe. Twitter, Shannon_Skinner. Instagram, I'm still kind of new to Instagram, but you can find me at shannon.skinner. And I've got some others, but those are really, I guess, the primary ones.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on.
Likewise. And thank you so much for having me. And I wish you all the best. This is really great, sharing women's voices, something important to me. So, and I'd like to help share it.
Yeah, we'll have to team up on definitely sharing some amazing stories. Maybe we can put some of your stories on our podcast. We can talk later. Anyway, pleasure to meet you, Shannon.
Likewise.
And I'm going to round this out. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen. Your comments are always welcomed and encouraged. Please subscribe to our Women's March Canada channel and receive updates every time we upload a new podcast. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is Women's March Canada podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Women's March CDA and on our website at womensmarchcanada.com. I'm Melissa Durrell, and I am wishing you a fantastic day. Here we go.